It is 6:30 in the morning. It's December 30th, 2020, and I guess waking up super early just seems to be a side effect of being a woman and being in your middle age. So here we are. Today we're going to work on a winter scene. It's not something I do very often, so there's a good possibility I'm going to struggle through this, but I've kind of cheated in a way because I'm working with this board and I've already prepared it with some really nice texturing, and this is a combination. I've got some paper in here, newspaper, and I've also used some spackle, basically the same stuff that you would use to fill in holes in your walls. And you just let that dry really well. Obviously you can't really put it on canvas because it would just crack because of the flexibility of canvas, so it's on a solid canvas board. You could also use a wood panel or a masonite board or anything like that that's got a nice firmness to it. And then once it got dry, I did my usual, I tinted my gesso and I coated that with gesso, and it's a pretty good coating. I think I actually did 2 coats of gesso because the gesso does kind of soak into this stuff underneath. Now I know if anyone is a traditionalist, they're probably not going to do something like this because these aren't traditional materials, but I'm sure, to me, this is very much like when Michelangelo did his gesso painting. Gesso used to be a ground up marble back in the day, and it was something that you could actually make thicker as well. It was like an al fresco, and you could do this kind of low relief sculpture underneath and then sort of paint over top. So we're sort of borrowing from old things and then taking from new things, and it makes it challenging when you're painting, but it also makes it exciting because there's a lot going on here already, and I can use this as I'm painting in my composition. So the image that you have for this is actually quite complex. It's a bunch of scraggly grass that traditionally does that kind of curly thing in the winter time. If you're finding it a little too overwhelming, you are certainly welcome to go outside and take a picture yourself of something similar that you want to work with. The reason I chose this panel with this particular picture is because it already has that movement going on. So I kind of matched the two. Usually when I'm prepping panels, I have no idea what they're going to end up being. It just kind of happens. So you kind of look through what you have, pick out what works, and kind of go from there. So we're going to start, and I find the most difficult part with the winter scene is that everything is white because it's winter, and the tendency is to just start with white, and then everything is white, and then you look at the painting and it's white, and it just becomes a frustrated mess. So I'm going to start with white, but I'm not going to use pure white. I'm going to mix it. And I want to use a big brush to force myself not to worry about the details. So I'm going to use a pretty big brush, this one here. And these are really super cheap brushes, but I kind of like the bristles because they stay nice and firm. Like, I've used this quite a few times and it hasn't really blown apart. I do have one that came apart here. No big deal. I just wrapped it with some tape. So, I mean, you can certainly spend lots of money on art equipment and art tools and things, but most of us are on a budget. And there's no reason why you can't just use what you find in the lesser stores. So I'm actually mixing a little bit of my raw umber with my white, and I'm going to start at the top. And this picture actually has houses in the back. I don't like to use houses, man-made things in my art. That's just me. You can put it in if you want to put it in, certainly do that. I prefer not to. And I'm actually thinking, I'm not even worried. In my mind, my painting is going to end at this point. Anyways, it's not going to include those houses. So this is just putting in a background in that upper area. And then I've got some cobalt blue. I'm going to add into that same color. It just cools it down and pushes it back into the background. You and me. Again, like I said, I really don't do winter scenes very often. I think the last one I did was, gosh, probably 10 years ago or more. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. We're not going to be focusing on painting snow. We're not painting grass. We're painting the winter sun. So I'm just kind of putting in some color here. And over on this side here, there's a nice bright area. And I'm going to put that in, and I like this because this is in one of our thirds. If you were to divide this into your thirds, this area here would actually be one of those thirds. So I'm going to use my yellow that I usually use, mix it with some of the white, and that's going to go in here. And I'm just blocking it in really rough, right? We're just pushing in the blocks that we see of color. We're not even concerned with this. I'm actually mentally removing the grass from the picture at this point and just focusing on the areas behind. We may end up doing this one in a couple rounds. A little bit of the yellow, cadmium yellow, just to pull out that yellow a little more. That's a tricky thing. I'm using a panel that's toned yellow, so when you put yellow on yellow, obviously it's not really going to do a whole lot. It would have been wiser to do not a blue, because there's already lots of blue in there. I would say either a red or a purple, like a reddish purple, something in that kind of family for your ground, and then work your colors on top. So I'm just kind of looking in the background where I see some of the brighter areas, and I realize you're looking at me and you're going, well, it's not yellow, Cheryl. And I'm like, yes, I know it's not yellow, but we're going to do this in sections. Put the yellow in, and then we're going to put some white over top, and the yellow actually will shine through that white. You'll see what I mean when we get there. That's the cool thing with oils, is you can do this kind of layering and piecing together stuff. Putting this in because there is this area over in the corner that's bright. And as you know, I've said before, just because your picture has a particular shade or color or object in it doesn't mean you need to include that in your composition. It's completely your choice what you want to put in. And just because you started it one way doesn't mean you're stuck with it. You can change it at any point. Don't keep fighting with something that's not working. It's actually a good rule of thumb to follow for life in general, really. it's not working, let it go. Move on to something else. So I'm doing kind of this is a very light lemon yellow back here. When you're painting snow, it's actually quite similar to when you're doing water, in that the snow reflects everything that's around it, because snow is water, right? We all know that. So snow is going to reflect the color of the leaves around it. It's going to reflect the color of the sky. So even though our brain says it's white, it's not ever truly just pure white. So I think what I want to do, because I see little bits of red and orange in here in my grasses, the area where that is, I'm actually going to put in the red and the orange as the background. And then as we draw in, that red and orange will peek through in between. So I'm going to take some of my cadmium red, and I'm still using the same brush. You can change brushes if you want. I'm going to use the same one. Cad red, cad yellow. This area here is a little bit darker, so I'm going to leave it fairly intense. I'm not going to push it down with any other white or anything. Already used red gesso on your panel or your canvas or whatever you're using, then you may want to go in with yellow instead, a nice bright yellow, and leave spaces in between to let some of that red pop through. And I'm changing up the shade in places. There's places like I just talked about that I see where it actually feels more yellow and less red, and then there's areas where it feels more red. So there's some definite areas that have shadow, and I'm going to put those in also. Just do a little bit over here I want to put in as well. A little bit of the grass further in the distance. A little bit up here. Then I'm going to take some of that raw umber. Tiny little bit of blue to cool things down. Push in a little bit of the shadowy area. Add a bit more blue to cool it down. So the paint is fairly thin. I'm not doing any thick layers right now. Remember we talked about before, usually the best plan is to start with a thinner paint and gradually work your way into thicker paint as you go along. This one here on this side has some shadow, so I'm just going to roughly pop in a little bit of that. Because our sun's coming from the left, and as I've talked about before, if you want your sun coming from a different direction, then you can certainly make that decision. But then remember to stick with it all the way through with what you're doing to keep consistent. And I know I haven't talked about brush strokes at this point, but at this point I'm just kind of like blotting and pulling. We're just sort of covering surface and giving ourselves areas to work with to put the details through. I'm just putting some of this shadow you can see peeking through the other side of the grass. Just pulling that all the way through. Keeping it airy so there's still spots in between where the red is showing. This stage is sort of doing the foundation of the composition. For me, it's kind of taking what's in my head and getting it down onto the canvas of the panel. Some continuation of that shadow in here, a little bit down here as well. Of course, these are not the permanent. I mean, we're going to darken up areas later, but right now we're just following the light and the shadow I'm not even thinking about this as snow or grass or trees or any of those things, those preconceived ideas that our brain tells us. I'm just looking at it as tones and rough shapes. And when I'm looking at it, I'm eliminating in my mind's eye all the details. I guess some artists, they say if you do the squint your eyes kind of idea, and things start to blur, and that's when you can see these kind of things. My eyesight's pretty bad to begin with, so I don't really have an issue with having to squint my eyes. Of course, when you have this texture, it does make it a little more challenging to get the paint in all the little crevices. Step back at this point and take a look. So we've got the ground in, and now I want to brighten up that sky just a little bit. So I've got some white and nothing else on the brush, and because I'm using oil, my paint is still wet, so I can do this without much worry because it's going to blend in to what I have in here already. I'm going to draw in some of this grass, and I've got a flat brush again, and you know I like to use these. This is a number 8, it's just a normal Courage brand. And we're going to use some of our yellow, a little bit of white, and we're going to do it fairly thick because now we're putting the paint on top of other paint. So we need to thicken it up. So welcome back to part 2 of our winter adventure. This one has been sitting for about a week now. I know I said we were going to come back the next day. But life happens, and so we're back. It's dry. It's an okay base to start with. Not a lot of darks in here, so that's something we're going to have to work on as we go. Because in order to get that grass, which I want anyways in my particular composition, I want the grass to be the star of this composition. In order for that to happen, the grass is very bright colored, has a lot of highlights, so I'm going to need to really darken up the areas that are in between in order for the grass to really shine. So we've got a lot of work ahead, and I'm not sure that we're going to finish it this sitting either, so we may end up doing a part 3. So I've got in my hand, it's a number 6 Curry's brush. Not that that really matters, this is just my preference today. It is the flat brush. And I'm just going to basically start doing some of those strands of grass. And I'm still trying to decide on what colors I want to put in here. Like I said, I want there to be some really nice contrast. I've got a light yellow on my on my palette. It is actually, it's an old tube that I had sitting around. It's called Cadmium Yellow Pale Hue. Doesn't mean you have to use that, it's just what I had. Trying to use up some of the older paints that I have in here. I actually have paint from when I was a teenager, when I first started doing the oil paintings. So some of them are antiques. So let's mix up something fairly light. use some of this yellow, mix in some white to it, brighten it up a little more. And then I'm going to use some of my walnut oil just to thin it out a little bit. I don't want it super thin. This yellow is an older paint, so the older paints, they do tend to get a little more dry, even though they're in the tube. They do dry out a little bit. So now, of course, because I've got a lot of texture, I've got that challenge of painting over the texture. But I'm not going to be too concerned about getting a perfectly smooth line. My goal is just kind of create some texture in here now. So now, as you can see, even though I've got this reference image in front of me, I'm not following it to the letter. Reference images, for me, kind of give me a feeling. They give me the feeling of where I was when I took that picture, what I was experiencing. This just sort of re-triggers my memory. And then as an artist, a visual artist, I need to take bits and pieces of that and turn it into a workable composition. Even though we see things in life that make an impression on us, doesn't mean we can take it color for color, shape for shape, and turn it into a successful composition. So at this point, that's what I'm working on, is creating something that's interesting without being overwhelming. Because really, when you look at the reference image that you've all printed out and you're looking at too as you're painting along, it is pretty overwhelming. There's a lot going on in there. There's a lot of strands of grass that are weaving around and swaying, and we're not going to put all that in. We're going to put in the feeling. I'm just sitting here. And if you have a canvas where you didn't put texture down, you're going to have a much easier time of this than what I'm doing right now. It's a little bit more challenging, but I'm okay with that. As I've said before, I like to challenge myself pretty much every time I sit down or stand up to the easel and begin a new piece. My intention is always to learn something new in creating that. For me, that's important. Life is learning, and if I'm not learning, then I'm not moving forward. I'm pretty sure even the great masters, if they were around and you were to ask them today, they would say they were learning every moment up until the last canvas or work of art that they created. And for me, I think that's what I find most exciting about art, is there's always a new discovery. There's always something cool to try. So as you can see, I'm kind of, as I'm going, I'm using the yellow, but I'm adding more white in some places, more yellow in other places, just to kind of vary it a little bit. I got time. Just kind of think of these little strands as sort of dancing along, swaying along in that December breeze. So I'm going to switch now and add some red to that yellow that I've started with. We're going to end up with an orange, but I want it to be a very bright, I want it to be more red than yellow. So it's going to be a pretty bright orange. This is what I've got here. I don't know if you can see that. Up against the blue you can. So it's really quite bright. To make sure I mix up enough of that. Sometimes I have a bad habit. I don't mix up enough of a color before I go in with it. And then I get partway through putting it in the painting and I run out of color. go back and remix more. So I'm going to take this and put it in spots. From up here. Depending on what you got underneath when you did your base will show up and it won't show up. So as I'm going through, you can see in spots where it sort of disappears here, and then on top of the blue it pops out, and up here it pops out. Don't be concerned, just creating some more interest and more contrast in here. And if you notice, if this is one of your first workshops you've done with me, and students have done my class here in the studio, will also tell you that when I see them holding their brush, like here, like a pencil, I make them stop, because when you're holding your brush close to here, you can only move it in this direction. You've only got a very limited area of movement. The further down, these long brushes, this is why they make these long brushes for oil painting. The further down you go, now all of a sudden I can move my brush and I have so much more movement and ability to add marks. So I encourage you, if you have that bad habit of holding your brush way up close to the bristles, move your brush down, move your hand down on that brush, and stand back from your work. When you're doing impressionist type of work like this, it's not meant to be looked at so closely, and it's meant to be looked at further away. So when you're creating it, stand back. I'm actually, my face is probably a good 2 feet from the canvas, and then occasionally I'll stop and I'll stand way back and take a look. So I want to see how things are developing. So yeah, my camera kind of stopped on me. It was recording in the wrong mode, so got that fixed now, and we're back. And as you can see, I am now starting to add some warm dark brown in some of these shadow areas. The world seems small. We can sit. It's really changed my approach this year. This whole being isolated and not being able to get out to shows and things like that. At first it felt terrible, I guess, just really restrictive, and I just, like a lot of us, I just thought, well, what is the point? Like, why am I even doing this? But then I realized that, you know what, this is an opportunity for me to try stuff, to try new things, to try new approaches, to try to get outside of those little boxes, those containers that we put ourselves in. It's so beautiful, you and me. We meant to be in the great outdoors, forever free. See, I'm just kind of going really slowly, just sort of picking through. As I'm doing this, I'm constantly looking back up at my reference image, and I'm also in my mind's eye. I mean, I've lived long enough now. I've walked enough trails and things that I have a memory of walking, hiking, seeing grass like this along the trails, along pathways, that snow all around and the paled out colors. So I'm using that. I'm using my life experience. I'm using what's in front of me in this picture. And I'm using my knowledge of creating art and composition and
what makes an interesting artwork. And there, my ideas of what makes an interesting artwork may not be yours. So you need to do what makes you happy. You want to do this more realistic? By all means, that should be the route that you take. It's a lot of little curl arounds, putting some of those in. Nice thing about putting them at the edge of your composition like this, the curl back in is what it's basically is making the work flow in a circle. So you're kind of going around and around the artwork. Whereas everything, if I had all the grass pointing in the same direction, that would lead you right off the page and just wouldn't hold the viewer's interest as well. And I think that little thing right there is what intrigues me the most about grasses, is that even in nature, in the natural environment, when you're looking at this image that I've given you, grasses pointing in all different directions, circling around on itself. And it's really offering something interesting to look at. I'm still using this same color. We're going to add some cooler shades in very shortly. Just really want to hit all the warm darks. So I just want to take a couple minutes real quickly and just talk about my plans for this year, 2021. This past year I moved all of my classes online to the pre-recorded format. I'm finding students are really enjoying that. It gives them the freedom to do the class when it's convenient for them. You can sit down, make a cup of tea, have a nice relaxing afternoon or morning making artwork. However, I know I'm not happy with the overall quality of the videos. And at this point, I just don't have financial means to get what I want to record these so that they're nice and clear for everyone. So that's what I'm working on this year. Sometimes you need to go and take a step back. So I think at this point I'm going to switch over to the cool shadows. And to do that, I'm going to use, again, the brown that I use, which is the raw umber. Burnt umber it's too red, so it's too warm. Raw umber is more of a neutral. And then I'm going to add Prussian blue, which is one of my favorite blues. It's very, very dark, like a navy blue, I suppose. Very nice. And again, if you've watched any of these, I'm mixing here. If you watched any other videos of mine, you've heard me say many times that I no longer use black in my work. I don't buy black. You can mix black. You mix the three primaries together, you've got black, if you really want black. But what I like to do instead is do what I'm doing right now, which is the warm shadows and then the cool shadows. Find true black, for me, is just too dark. And there's nothing, if you look in nature, there's nothing that's an absolute pure black. It just doesn't exist in nature. Not on Earth. Black is the absolute absence of light. Nothing ever gets quite that dark enough on this planet yet. So as you can see, I'm kind of adding this cool blue now, sort of adjacent to the warm blue that we've got here. Really adding some nice depth. I'm really liking this a lot, actually. This area here looks really nice now. I'm really enjoying this. See, this is the thing when you're creating art, you think of it as something that's done in stages. And you're sort of building one stage onto the next. See the truth around you. And you have to enjoy the process. If you don't enjoy how you get to the end, the final product, then you need to change how you're getting there. You need to try something else. It's okay to change your mind. Try something different.
From a distance you can tell.
So you see these areas here that I haven't touched? That's actually going to be the snow. I kind of have a plan in my head sometimes when I sit down to do things.
You and me were meant to
I
be.
think I'm going to stop at this point. Now I'm actually going to take a new brush. Grab this one here. I don't even know what this is. It's kind of worn out. I think it's a number 10. And I'm going to go in with some white that has a small amount of yellow mixed in.
In the great outdoors.
The tricky part when the camera's on, I can't, I want to stand in front of this right now, but you wouldn't be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm working off to the side instead for the benefit of the students.
Forever free. You and me.
You can see I've changed how I'm holding my brush now.
In the great outdoors.
And I've got the paint fairly thick. As you can see, it's pretty thick on my brush for this foreground area. I'm just kind of very carefully dragging it across and letting that texture that's on here pull the paint off and onto the surface.
Forever free.
Not dropping a painting on the floor at least once a month, you're just not working hard enough. Put some of this back here. We've got some snow that's in the sun in behind this area. So we're getting close to the final 10 to 20% of the work, and this is the part where things start to make sense. It starts to come together. There's always that part where we were not that long ago where it was pretty messy and we really didn't know what the heck we were doing. Now we're getting up to that area where pretty sure we know what we're doing. Still not 100%, but we're pretty sure. For me, this painting is part of a series that I started. Gosh, I think I started taking pictures in October, and then I kind of formulated the whole idea by November. So basically, there's a field across the street from my home, from my studio. I've been here over 20 years now. And the field, it has about, I don't know, if I had to guess, there's probably about 50 trees there. It doesn't look like there's 50, but if you sat down and actually counted all the little saplings and whatnot, there's about 50 trees. And then there's a little path that goes through, and there's lots of different grasses, and there's a marshy area that gets filled up with water in the spring, and then there's different underbrush and bushes and things that change color with the seasons, and it's always been a lot of fun just watching. I look out the window here in the studio. It's a north-facing window, and I look out across the street and I watch this little woodlot change over the year. So my idea was to actually start recording those changes and doing something remarkable with it. I really find that's a very cool thing, watching the seasons change. As much as I hate the winter, I would still want to live somewhere where I can see the change of seasons. For me, it's just one of those really cool, remarkable things in nature that's really reflects life in general, how things ebb and flow and change through our lifetime. I'm gonna add some of this white spots. He likes to tell me when he thinks I've been in here too long. So I'm gonna mix up some cobalt blue and some white. I'm gonna go into some of these cooler areas here. Now the trick is, because I've got wet paint everywhere in here, and I've got yellow in many places on this canvas, don't want to start getting a lot of green in here. So the trick is to watch my brush and make sure that I'm not blending that yellow in to my blue. Even though we can't see it in the picture, I'm going to put some of that shadow down here. The sun, I haven't talked about it yet, but the sun is actually up to the left, coming kind of this way in. So this area here is more in shadow. And then it's going to reflect a little bit of shadow here onto the grass, or sorry, the snow. This is grass. This is the grass reflecting onto the snow. Giving some form to this snow now. It was just a white blob before, and then we're sort of adding spots where it's sunken in. It sort of gives that bluish hue. I love adding these kinds of things in and then watching how it really just transforms the entire composition. It still fascinates me how you can add a different color or a different tone and then just transform the entire thing. Just this one little bit that we're doing right now just adds so much depth. Really change the entire composition. Got some of that snow. There's a section here you can see in behind the clump of grass. The snow is in shadow. I'm having a lot of fun with this. I'm adding in more snow clinging onto the grass. That's actually not in our image, but I think it's really lending some nice interest to the composition. Just kind of tying it all together. Which is really what you want. You want things to flow really nice. Make sure you step back, take a look. Now I've gotten really quiet here because I'm really focusing on these last little details.
I'm just sitting here.
I want to put some of this blue up here also. I find it's a little too gray, but I don't want it to overpower what we have happening here. Like this section here I really like. Got some nice contrast going on. Take some of that cobalt blue and white again. And just put a little bit up here. I don't want to overdo.
I got time. It's clear to see.
Take just a couple more dots of snow over here. Let's see if we can't get it to grab on to some of these areas. Again, it's pretty thick on there. Take some of that nice dark that we had, the cool dark, the Prussian blue and the raw umber. Just gonna go and make some of these darks even darker. This is the trick. If you find that the light is not light enough and you're already using white, you can't get any lighter, so then darken your darks. And when you do that, the light areas will look lighter. I'm pretty happy with that. As usual, I may end up going back and tweaking a couple things here and there, but overall I think we've got a pretty decent composition. And as per usual, the last thing we do is we sign it. And there we go. Got ourselves some nice expressive winter grass. I hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to seeing you again at the next workshop. Bye for now.
Forever free.